today for August, we're going to be going through Document Manager. So who am I? I'm Chase Linsenbigler. For those of you that haven't been here before or have never met me, it's nice to meet you. I like to leave my camera on for introductions, but I'm going to go ahead and turn that off now so you can focus on the content. And what I do here at WiSys is I manage all of our partner enablement. So that's kind of everything that a consultant would do, but I bring that over to the partnership side. So I give training to our partners on the system. I help them with design tools, specific customer process flows, specific tailorings for customers, all kinds of things like that. And I do this because I was a former customer facing consultant. So making the transition to doing that partner enablement stuff has been pretty much right in my wheelhouse from the things that I've done before. And of course, over time, I've developed a lot of product knowledge, which is easy to bring over and bring to the partners and begin working with the partners and bring them up to speed on the product. Now, for 2023, a really big goal of ours is to grow our partner program. But in addition to that, we're also very focused on producing content for all of our users. So when I talk about users, that can be anybody from a customer or a partner that's actually in there using a software, or I like to include our prospects in that because, of course, the more content I have out there will help our prospects answer questions about WiSys and make more educated decisions when they're deciding to go with a WMS. So more content is coming throughout the year. That's videos, written documentation, and of course, a big part of that is these learning labs. So the learning labs will take place on the second Tuesday of each month from 2:30 to 3:30 EST. So if you haven't been here before and you want to make sure you're here going forward, I'd suggest blocking off that time. We only send out an invite for these about a week in advance or so. So that way, I know people get busy and schedules get filled up. So if you block off that time, it will be available for these going forward. And going back to my partnerships, so I'm a dedicated resource for all of our partners. I do things like introduction training, in-depth training on design tools, or partners have standing meetings with me as well for continued enablement. That's to answer questions about specific prospects or help solve problems that our partners are having when they're learning the software and playing around with the software, things of that nature. So for any partners that are here on the call today that don't have anything standing in place with me, I suggest we get something set up. I like to have something on the schedule with all my partners so we can stay in the loop with each other, and I can, of course, take care of any outstanding issues or questions or things like that in a much more timely manner when we're talking regularly. So reach out and let's see what we can get on the schedule. All right, so now why are we here today? Here's what we're going to cover. So Document Manager is what drives all of the printing functionality from the WiSys system, right? So when we talk about document management, basically it's a system of, you could say modules, sometimes I call them bins, and folders in those modules and bins that allow us to set up documents with specific functionality based on our transactions and the documents that we're using in SAP Business One. So with that, it's a large repository for all of the documents that you need to print out of WiSys, whether those are Agility labels or Crystal reports. Now, we're going to go through how the labels are stored or Crystal reports are stored in that document manager and how that links to our applications and, of course, the files that those labels are stored in. Then we'll talk about document properties, how they affect the document printing process and what's really important to note there. And then we'll go into document assignments, which allow us to segregate different documents based on things like an item or an item group or a customer. They allow us to identify that we need different documents to print in different scenarios. And with that, we'll go through a couple of those scenarios today, just to kind of put everything in action and familiarize ourselves a little bit deeper with how the Document Manager product works. And lastly, after all that's done, we'll talk about importing and exporting Document Manager files. That's a really important piece whenever you're testing WiSys. You want to build all your labels in your test database, test them out in Document Manager in your test database. And that's where the importing and exporting comes into play, because we can simply export an XML file, bring it over into the live database, and it brings all those document roles that we're going to learn about and everything that we're going to set up today, property and assignment wise, that all comes over in the XML. And it's a really important step that people miss sometimes. So we'll cover importing and exporting as well at the end here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to open up Agility Explorer. And actually, before I do that, I always like to show. So we'll be in Agility Explorer here, going into Document Manager. That's how you access it. If you have the add-on running in SAP Business One, you also could access this from the WiSys menu in SAP B1. I'm going to go to File, Options, and Documents. And here is our Document Manager. So our big focus today is in the Document Management section. That's why today is really about Document Manager and not documents as a whole, but we will touch on import and export. There's just not a ton to go over there. It's pretty simple functionality in those cases. So from here in Document Manager, like I discussed earlier, we have modules, or a lot of the time I'll refer to them as bins, that are based on SAP for the most part. And within those, we have folders that hold documents. So here, in inventory, that's pretty standard. Labels for items, that's what our standard label would be, or packages if we have pallets or cartons sitting on the shelf in standard inventory. If we want labels to print with a goods receipt or a goods issue, things like that, that's all housed here in the inventory section. Sales AR, pretty self-explanatory here. This is anything that uses out-of-the-box SAP to fulfill sales orders in WiSys. So when we talk about like an SO delivery, it's things of that nature, right? So we have sales return, SO delivery, a packing list. This is using regular SAP functionality, not packaging. If you noticed in inventory, we have some packaging related things. Sales AR, nothing packaging in here. Purchasing, once again, we have a little bit of packaging here with the PO pallet receiving, but this is just mostly focused on PO receiving, of course. Production is everything production related. That will all be stored in here. And we do have the ability to print a production finished goods pallet label as well. So there is a little packaging here, but this is just everything production. And then packaging, the reason I've been highlighting that the whole time, actually only refers to shipping related packages. So, production packages are here, standard inventory is up here. If we receive a pallet, that's in here. But anything that is related to fulfilling a sales order, so something that's going on a shipment, if we have a pallet that's tied to a sales order or shipment, or a carton that's tied to a sales order or shipment, that all is here in packaging. And of course, as we create package types in our settings here, when we go to our package type settings and our WMS settings, if I add a package type like bag, that would of course become a packaging print option that we have here to create. And then lastly, we have UDFs here. That gives us a little bit more customizability to the parameters and the way that these documents print. Those come in handy in situations where what you're trying to print doesn't necessarily fit any of the standard labeling formats that we have. And with that, I'm sure you heard me reference parameters. So that's going to be really the next piece of this here. So when we talk about Document Manager, first we can tie this into how the handheld triggers these prints when you're using the handheld application. So going from Document Manager, right, we have print types based on the folders. So if we go in the module, we go to the folder, we will have a print type based on that PO receiving folder that would print whatever labels are inside of that folder, right? And that is fueled by a parameter. So if we know our print type is PO receiving, let's go ahead and jump back to the desktop here actually. So I'm going to jump to my desktop and open Form Studio. So we know our print type is PO receiving. So we need to make sure that we understand what parameters our PO receiving print type fulfills, right? So when we go to print on the handheld, we set up the action so that it's this PO receiving that it's going to print from that folder, right? So if we set up PO receiving, we know we're looking at this folder. And then, sorry, jumping back and forth here. So we know we're going to look at that folder. So if we go to our GRPO application here, we go down to our actions and we take a look at the print, we can check and see what parameters that's passing. So when we look to print for PO receiving, so we're printing that folder, we're passing one parameter and it's doc entry. That's the only parameter that we pass. We take that doc entry information and we share that to the label. So of course, our label needs to be set up with matching parameters to receive whatever information we're sending it from the handheld. So if we jump over to Document Manager here and open up this label, we should see only one parameter here, and it should be our doc entry parameter. So let's just give that a second here to open up. So if I go to my data and check my parameters, we'll see doc entry is our only parameter here. So again, when we decide where we want to print from, so we know we want to print from that PO receiving folder, that's the action that we define on the handheld. So if you make a tailored application, you got to pick where you're printing from. Or if you want to use one of our standard applications to print, you got to understand what print action it has to know where it's printing from in Document Manager. So here, PO receiving folder tells us, okay, we need our PO receiving print action here. And then that PO receiving print action has the parameter of doc entry. So based on the folder we're printing to, that allows us to define what parameters need fulfilled. Okay, we need to grab a doc entry number. So the label we create or the label we're going to use needs to be able to receive that doc entry parameter from the handheld scanner. So this is really important when you're tailoring labels or tailoring applications, of course. If you're tailoring an application, you just need to understand what print action to use based on where you want your labels to be coming from, right? So if I'm tailoring an application that is going to print labels from PO receiving, I need to understand that the parameter will, of course, be doc entry and know that I need to pass that. And when I'm creating a custom tailored label, I need to, of course, again, set up the parameter to be doc entry so it can receive that information from the handheld whenever it tries to trigger the print. Now, I know all that seems pretty simple, but that's one of the, major leading factors to issues we have surrounding documents. Somebody will be trying to print a document, they'll be getting an error, they don't understand where it's coming from. Typically, it has to do with the parameters not matching up. And that means it has to be the exact same. If I had doc entry and item code here, of course, that's going to be an issue because it's not matching the parameters that I'm getting from the gun. So there's a mismatch of data there and it will cause an issue. So whenever you create a tailored label like that, of course, you can go to our out of the box label like I did and hit open and check its parameters in Document Manager to make sure you know the parameters that need fed. Or you can go right to the source if you're comfortable with Form Studio and check out the print action where you want to print from. And then you can, of course, make sure you know the correct parameter that your label needs. And that's the way that I would suggest doing it if you're comfortable in here. You can simply go to the form that you're going to print from with your tailored label and just check what print type it has so you can make sure you have the right parameters there. So now I'd say we understand exactly how the linkage works, right? We understand how these labels are stored, what the hierarchy system here in Document Manager is, and how that connects to the handheld and in turn connects the handheld to our labels there. So we understand how that all works. Hold on, I'm going to dismiss this real quick so it doesn't keep going off. We understand how that all works. Now let's talk a little bit more about the functionality from within Document Manager that changes the way these labels will behave. So first, let's talk about properties. Our properties are listed below here. We can also access them and make changes to them by right-clicking and going to Properties, or when we have a label highlighted, just by clicking Properties below here. So here in properties, first we can see the path. Of course, we're not going to want to change that here once we have our label linked up. We typically don't want to change the path. That'll cause issues. But we'll go in here and we can change our orientation. Portrait and landscape, pretty basic there. Typically with a label, it's going to be portrait. That's what's going to be most common, but that'll depend on how you set up your labels and what printers you're using, etc. Copies, we have the ability to define a default number of copies that'll print. So here in this case, this label would print one every time. You could set this up for whatever you need. You could even put 10 copies in here, and every single item you do, it would have 10 copies of this PO receiving label. If we check the box for prompt, we'll be able to change that number of copies. So a box would pop up with our default. So on the handheld, let's say we do our GRPO functionality, a box would pop up there that would just say, how many copies do you want to print? It would default to one. We could hit OK there and print, one copy, or we could change that box to say 5 and then hit OK and print all 5 copies. And then you can enable and disable labels. This is important for our out-of-the-box labels. If you're tailoring something, I typically recommend just disabling the out-of-the-box stuff so it's still in here. You can still refer back to it when you need to. It still gives you that functionality to just easily open it up in Label Designer from here. But effectively, the label's turned off. So every time I do GRPO in here, nothing would print right now. There would be no label that's active to be printed, right? But the label's still in here so you can check and see how it's set up, open up that label easily and have again, a repository here to look back at all the other labeling options you have within Document Manager there. So that's the best way to deal with labels that you don't want to use anymore, but you might want to keep around to refer back to. All right, so that is the properties. That's what's important to know about the properties there. Let's talk a little bit about assignments. And this is the big important part of today's session. We're going to spend, the majority of the time today going over assignments and how to use them. So yeah, let's get into that a little bit here. So first, we have access. Access affects what type of assignment you have. So from in here, we're at goods received PO. Our access is public. What that means is this will print for everything except for what's on this list. So in items here, I could go ahead and add an item for this to be excluded from. So if I use this 25003, that means every time this label will print unless the item I'm receiving in is 25003, then no label is going to print in this instance. Now if I switch it to private, it just reverses the roles. So here, this document would only be assigned to things. So right now, with it assigned to nothing, no label would ever print when I use my GRPO. Now, if I go in here, and once again, if I just give it an item, let's just do that same one. Nothing will print unless this item is received, then I'll get some labels. So typically no label is going to print, but whenever it comes across the right item, then the label will print. Now, in the case here of GRPO or PO receiving, of course, we have two types to exclude or include, which is items and item groups. That's obviously dictated based off of the document in SAP Business One. So let's say we're looking at packaging. If we look at our packaging layer here, we have customers and customer groups, because in this case, it's a shipping package. So it's going to be tied to a sales order. So we can also do customers and groups as well. So that is how assignments work generally, right? That's a little overview, a little taste of what that looks like. But now I want to go over a couple of scenarios to really touch on the full ability here of document assignments. So I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint real quick, and we'll go through this first scenario. I just want to do two scenarios to kind of give you the full understanding of how we want to use those assignments. So here we have two different GRPO labels that we want to use, right? So we focused mostly on GRPO so far. So we're going to use that PO receiving folder. And we want to separate these GRPO labels based on the SAP item group. So I tailored a GRPO with batch label that's going to print for the items in rainbow printers groups. And then I'm going to keep my out of the box for all other groups. So let's pause there and go set it up that way first, and then we'll add the other things afterward. So here I'm going to go back up to that purchasing PO receiving folder, and I have my standard out of the box label. So let's go ahead and add our tailored one. So I right clicked on it there and went to new. I could also hit new down here. Then I got to go find my label, give it a path. So it'll default to Crystal Reports. You want to make sure you switch to label here. Again, we can handle Crystal Reports as well, and we will touch on that in a bit. So I'm going to scroll down and find that GRPO with batch and open that up. I'm going to leave this all standard right now. I'll probably make some changes to that here shortly, but right now I'm just going to leave everything as it comes and hit save. So as a start, now we have two labels in here. What would happen right now is if I went through the GRPO process and printed, I would get two labels for every item, one of each of these, because there's no roles set up, so they're just both going to print every time. So based on our scenario here, we want that tailored GRPO to become private because it's only going to print for items in rainbow printers. And we want that out of the box one to stay public and print for everything else. So if I jump back over here, I'm going to change this one here to private. We're going to do it by item group this time. And this items item group and rainbow printers is the other group we want to assign here. All right, those two groups are assigned. So now this document will print for those and nothing else because it is private. So in this scenario, most items are just going to print this label. But right now, if we printed an item group item or a rainbow printers group item, it would print both labels. So now if we go to goods or CPO here, we can exclude it from those so that we're not getting double labels. We can add items. And I can add rainbow printers. And now it's set up so that we won't get both labels. So we have our full segregation of the labels here. When we are printing from an item group of items or rainbow printers, we get the GRPO with batch label. When we're printing from goods or CPO, we get the regular goods or CPO label for anything other than items or rainbow printers. Now, before we get any further, we have this logic set up. Let's go ahead in here and make sure the parameter is correct too. That's a good step to get used to doing whenever we're setting up labels in here. Of course, I tailored this. I know that the parameter is correct, but we want to practice that and get used to doing that. So we just open it up here, check our parameter, doc entry. Okay, that's correct based on the print type. We feel good about that. Now we know this is going to correctly print. Our logic set up, everything's good there. Now we can go take care of our last step here. So we want the ability to change the quantity that our tailored label is going to print, but typically, we're going to be printing two. So all we'd be doing to fulfill that need here is we would go to our GRPO with batch, and we would right click, go to properties, default that to 2 copies, but we'll prompt so that we have the ability to change that 2 copies if the need arises that we need more or less. And I'm just going to keep our standard label at 1. And now scenario 1 is taken care of in here. So if we jump back to that, we have it set up so that our tailored GRPO label is only going to print for those 2 specific groups. Our other label is going to print for everything else. And our tailored label will prompt with a defaulted quantity of 2, but we'll be able to change that because of the print prompt there. So that's a pretty basic scenario to get used to how this works. Now we're going to go over a little more advanced scenario and something very common with a lot of our customers who fulfill sales orders with WiSys shipping. This is very common with anybody using our shipping product. So scenario 2 here, we want to do shipping cartons. So if you remember before, that's in the packaging module or bin in Document Manager. And from within that packaging module, we have a folder there called cartons. That's our shipping cartons. That's where we're going to function. So let's go ahead and pull that up first. So packaging, carton right here. And we have one label in there. So packaging carton, that's shipping cartons, okay. Now we want to switch from our out of the box label. So we don't want to use that anymore. We want to switch to some EDI labels that we have set up for our customers. So we have 3 different EDI labels separated by customer. We have a tailored ES EDI label. That's for our Earthshaker customer only. Then a tailored MT EDI label for MaxiTech only. And then a standard EDI label, which is going to be for all other customers here. So I'm going to jump back in here and get those started. So first, we don't want to use our out of the box label. So like I said before, we want to keep it in here so that we can check back and check the parameter. So I'm going to disable it. It stays here in the system, but let's go ahead and check our parameters so we know what we're looking for to make sure our labels are set up correctly here. So I'm going to open it up in Label Designer. Okay, here's our label. This is the out of the box carton label for shipping. And if we not check our query, we want to check parameters there. If we check parameters, we'll see we're feeding package number and shipment number. So that is what that print action is looking for. I trust our standard out of the box labels, however they're set up, that's going to be in line with what that print object is looking for. So we know we need package number and shipment number. Let's go ahead and make sure all of these tailored ones fit that. So our Earthshaker label here, ES EDI, this is for Earthshaker. Check our parameters. Good, shipment number, package number. Now our MT EDI label looks slightly different. Parameters, shipment number and package number. And lastly, we'll check our standard EDI label here that we want to use. And again, slightly different from the other two, very similar to the Earthshaker. Parameters, shipment number, package number, perfect. All right, so all of our labels are good to go. Let's go ahead and add them here in Document Manager. So we'll go up to carton, and again, we could hit new or right click. I'll just hit the new button this time. Go to my path and grab each of those. So we got to switch from Crystal Report to WLB. And we'll start with, let's start with our standard one here. That will be our public one. So standard EDI label, we'll leave this all right now. Standard EDI, that's going to stay public. And then we'll add the other two, which are each going to be private. ES EDI for Earthshaker, that's going to be private. And then MT EDI for MaxiTech. And that is also going to be private. And now again, if we jump back here and look at our roles, MT is for MaxiTech only, ES is for Earthshaker only, and the standard is going to work for everything else. So we'll come in here, our standard, we don't want items, we want customers this time. So now we're going to use customers, and we're going to exclude it from Earthshaker and MaxiTech. So here's Earthshaker, and here's MaxiTech. And now each of these are just going to have one customer they're assigned to. So in this case, last time our labels aligned perfectly, right? So our one label had, both of them excluded from it. The other one had both of them assigned to it. In this case, we're splitting it up. Well, I don't want MaxiTech here. I want Earthshaker. We're splitting it up. So our main label has both of these excluded from it, but our other labels each have one assigned to them. So here we'll do MaxiTech. So when we look again, our main label has 2 under here, but our other labels each only have one company assigned to them, while this one's excluded from both. And now that logic's set up, so everything else we print, it's going to be a standard EDI label, but if it's an Earthshaker order, it'll be the Earthshaker label, and if it's a MaxiTech order, it'll be the MaxiTech label. All right, jump back over here. So now Earthshaker requires 4 labels every single time, and MaxiTech requires 2. There's no exceptions here. So we don't want to have prompt turned on in this case because we don't want our people to have the ability to change the number of labels. We'll get fined if it doesn't have the right amount of labels. So we're going to force them to print that default of 4 and 2. So we'll go to our Earthshaker properties and give it 4 copies every time. And we'll go to our MaxiTech properties and give it 2 copies every time. But with that being said, it varies with our standard EDI labels. Even though we have some companies that don't require us to have a specific label, they still may require 2 or something like that. So in our properties, we're going to leave it defaulted to 1 because that's what we'll do to save, paper and labels. In most cases, we'll just print 1. But if a company requires it, sometimes we need to be able to change that quantity. So we'll leave the prompt on in that case. So no prompt on these 2, defaulted to 4 and 2. In this one, we have prompt and default left at 1. Now, our last step here, we also want a packing slip to print with each carton in this case. So let's go ahead and set that up as well. In our carton section here, we do have a default WiSys packing slip. I'm just going to go ahead and pull into there. And now in this case, it would print every single time. We don't set up any roles on this one. We leave it public. There's no assignments here. And in this case, it doesn't matter what label's being printed. The same packing slip will print every single time. We have a little bit of a different logo here, so it's a crystal report as compared to a label file, and it's set up in there. But crystal reports can follow the same rules if necessary. In here, we could segregate this based on customer or item or whatever we want to do. Or, of course, if we decide, okay, we don't need the packing list at this stage, we need it later, we could just remove it from here. Pretty simple. And then, we're right back to square one with our labels. So we ran through both of those scenarios and understood exactly how to set up these complex scenarios here from within Document Manager. So now our test database is ready. It's good to go. I feel good about what's in there, and that's how I want my live to look. So let me just jump in here, and we're going to import and export our labels. So we're going to export them from our test here, exactly how they're set up, and then import them into our live database. So I'm going to go ahead to document export. Now, of course, here I could uncheck certain boxes and pull out certain labels. In this case, I don't really care. So I want to check that box, include my customer and item mappings, the things that we just went through and did in our assignments. I'm leaving all these boxes checked, and I'm just going to export that file here. So what this is going to do is it's going to bring over all the labels set up the way that I just set them up. So they'll still have those specific customers and item roles assigned. They'll have the properties assigned the same, and they'll be in the same spot. It's going to pull that all out to an XML, and I can simply take that XML file, my LL labels, and I can bring it over to my test database or my live database and copy over all the work I already did. This is obviously a much better alternative than a situation where you go in there and you set up each of them individually. Again, in this case, I know it's right the first time. I've tested it. It's ready to go. I can just drop it in and bring over that same labeling structure. So here, I'm just going to go into document import, click on my file, C drive, and we'll go to program files x86. WiSys, our WiSys folder, and our document folder. That's where we store our labels typically. A lot of the time I like to keep my labels in there so everything's together and it's easy to find. Sometimes I'll make different folders based on what I'm tailoring the labels for, but I like to try and keep things in one place. So we'll hit OK. We see we have 3 XMLs here. When we install WiSys, you get these 2 XMLs. This is our standard out of the box our standard out of the box crystal reports for SQL and our standard out of the box labels here, right? So we have both of them. Now, before we import this though, let's check and make sure we know what it looks like in here. So if we go to PO receiving, our tailored application label there, our GRPO with batch is not there. And when we go to packaging, cartons, again, not there. We have 2 standard out of the box labels there. So let's go ahead and import, check that box. So we're going to bring over that full XML. Successfully imported our documents, hit OK. Now the changes took place. And if we jump back in there, go to document management, if we check our PO receiving, we see now we have our tailored GRPO label in there with that private setup, the items in rainbow printers, everything that we did before, the prompt, the copies. It brings over a carbon copy of that label setup, and we'll see the same here for cartons as well. So again, like I mentioned before, this is a really fast way to bring your labels from test to live. It's something that I see all the time that people don't do. They go in here and they reset everything up. You see it even change that carton label to disabled because I had it in my folder before as disabled, so it disables it for me. But in this case, in my live, I had an extra label in there, so we'd have to go in here and go ahead and disable that one. But if it was in the XML, it would disable it automatically. So it's a very fast way to bring all your labels over and make sure the roles are correct. You test it in your test. You don't want to have to go reset it because that opens you up to human error. So just export it, import it. The roles are correct. The labels are set up the way they need to be, and it's all in there ready to go. So I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint here. That is what we wanted to go through today. So let's run back through everything we covered real quick. So we talked about how labels are stored in Document Manager and how they're linked to the applications in WiSys. That was our standard structure in Document Manager is those modules or bins. There's folders underneath of those for all the different transactions or documents that we're working with in SAP. Those would link to the handheld application. The handheld application has a specific print function for those specific folders. So every folder in there has a different print function. You define that print function on the handheld. So all of our out-of-the-box applications that print have a specific folder defined in there. Then that application is going to know what parameters to pass based on the folder that is going to be trying to print. So in that case, you use the application. It will attempt to print everything that is in that folder by passing them the parameter information that we talked about. And then, of course, every label that's set up in that folder needs to have that same parameter so that it can correctly get the information from the handheld scanner. So again, we set those labels up in specific folders. You got to make sure the handheld is printing from that folder you set the label up in, and then you got to make sure that the parameters match on the handheld and the label so that the information is transferred correctly. Then we talked about document properties. The biggest part of that is probably the printing, the ability to prompt and change the number of copies that you're going to print, as well as the ability to default a number of copies. Situations like that Earthshaker and Maxi-Text scenario that I talked about where, the customer requires 4 or 2 every time, those are pretty common when it comes to shipping. So those are things you want to make sure you don't give people the ability to change it. You want to just force them to have 4 copies of the label so that you don't get fined and you adhere to the shipping rules. And we can do that with that default there. Also, you can change the orientation and you have that ability to enable or disable labels. And again, a good tip is to disable everything that you're not using. That way it's still set up in there the way it needs to be in case you need to go back and turn it on later, or you want to look at it and mimic some of the settings or check the parameters. Then we went through document assignments. Based on the document type in there, we have the ability to identify that a label will only print for specific customers or specific item groups, those types of things. Again, what you can segregate the labels by depends on what type of document you're printing. And of course, the logic there makes sense because you don't have a customer in the case of a PO and things like that. So we went through those document assignments. And then lastly, we went through importing and exporting documents, and again, Very easy way when you're implementing WiSys, going from test to live, export all the documents. That way they're set up the way they need to be, the way you tested them. There's no chance for human error or mistakes whenever you're re-importing them. In this case, you export them, you import them, and they come over exactly the same, and it's the best way to do it. So that's all we wanted to cover today. I know this was a little bit of a quicker session. Looks like we still got about 20 minutes left for questions if we have any here, but I really wanted to zero in on Document Manager today and not talk about creating labels very much outside of the parameters, and not talk about printing from the handheld much outside of parameters, because we really wanted to focus on what's going on in Document Manager and not cloud it with all the other information. But of course, this ties very heavily into anything we've talked about on the handheld that has printing involved in it, or everything that we've talked about before too with labels and creating labels. This is kind of that missing link between the two. So now you can put it all together.